Hi everybody, today we are in the garden and we're going to be having a look at daffodils and what to do with them once they have finished flowering. There are a lot of stories out there about what you should do with your daffodils. Some of them are true, some of them not so much so. So I thought we'd go through a few of the common theories and see what you should be doing with your daffodils. Our first myth is, I should snip off the daffodil heads after flowering. Is this true or is it false? And this is true, and here's why. So what's happening at the moment is all this energy that is coming into the plant through photosynthesis is being directed into these seed heads and these flowers. And we don't want that to happen at this stage. It's finished flowering for the year. We want the energy to be directed into the bulb at the bottom of the flower. And if there's energy going into the bulb at the bottom, then that's stored for next year and it will come back with a brilliant display of flowers. So what we want to do is we want to just take a pair of scissors and we want to just snip off the faded flower heads, leaving the stem because that also helps to absorb the light. So the leaves and the stem, they take in the light through photosynthesis and then they will now direct that light into energy and it will go into our bulb at the bottom, get stored up and produce great flowers for next year. So just take a bucket, take your scissors, go around the garden, snip off your faded daffodil flower heads and put them on your compost or in your green recycling bin. Erin's helping me in the garden this week and she is snipping off some of the daffodil heads that have faded. With so many daffodils in the garden, it's a really big job, so it's great to have a helper.
Mum,
yeah.
Is this dead?
No, that's still looking quite nice, isn't it? So we only want to snip off the ones that are faded. Our second myth is, I should mow down and cut back my daffodils straight after they've finished flowering. Is this true or is it false? And this is false. You want to leave your leaves and stems on your daffodils. You can snip the flower heads off, but leave the stems and the leaves for at least 6 weeks to die back naturally on their own. Because what they're doing at the moment is they are absorbing all that light from the sun and they are turning it into energy which will go to the bulb to produce great flowers next year. So if you were to mow them all down or cut them back in your garden just now, you're risking not as good flowering next year or perhaps no flowering at all. So at the moment this is the middle of April, so if I start to snip off my flower heads just now and then leave the flowers to die back, I'm not going to be mowing down these daffodils until the first week in June. And some of the daffodils are still flowering, so they're a few more weeks down the line, so those ones you would have to leave until later in June. So work it out from when you're snipping off your daffodil heads when they finish flowering and then calculate 6 weeks down the line, and then it will be safe to mow your flowers and tidy them up then. The next myth is, I should tie my daffodils into bunches with twine to keep them looking neat and tidy in the garden as the foliage dies back. Is this true or is it false? This is also false. You don't want to do this because you are not exposing the full leaf area to the sun for photosynthesis and getting energy into that bulb. If they're all tied in a tight bundle, then there is only a small part of that leaf section and those stems that are exposed to the light and able to produce energy. If you just leave them to flop in the garden, then lots of leaf, lots of stem are exposed to the sunlight for photosynthesis, and that's what we want. Again, it's not very tidy, but that's going to produce the best flowering for you next year. The next myth is, I should water my daffodil foliage after they have finished flowering. Is this true or is this false? This is true. It is helpful to water your daffodil foliage when it's starting to die back. The reason for this is it just helps to get moisture to the roots, which helps keep the bulb healthy while it's trying to store up all that energy for next year's flowers. And at the moment we've had a really cold spell, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be watering because it's actually been really dry as well. We haven't had much rain at all. I can't think when the last time that we had a proper good downpour of rain. So when your daffodils do start to die back, get the hoses out to the watering cans and give the foliage a water. Myth number 5. Daffodils can be planted near the soil surface about 1 times their depth. Is this true or is this false? And the answer to this is false. You want to be planting your daffodil bulbs quite deeply, otherwise you might encourage them to divide into smaller little bulblets if they're too close to the soil surface. And if the bulblets are just too small, that are the divisions, then they just won't flower well. They need to be nice and deep. The roots can go nice and deeply down into the soil, get all that moisture and get lots of energy into the bigger bulbs to produce good flowers. So plant them deeply, don't plant them just under the soil surface. And the last myth we're going to look at today is spring is a good time to lift and divide your daffodils. Is this true or is it false? And this is true. It is a great time to divide up your daffodils if you've got maybe some clumps that aren't flowering so well, or maybe they're in the wrong place, or maybe they've just naturalised over time and you've got a bit of an overcrowded area and you want to split it up. So what you want to do is you want to lift the daffodils, dig them up nice and deeply to get right under the bulbs and not slice through them by accident. Find a new spot for them and dig a hole that is nice and deep, 2 to 3 times the depth of the daffodils. When you dig up the clump of daffodils, you want to make it into smaller clumps, so not individual bulbs, but not too many at once either. About 5 to 6 is ideal. You can pop them into their new planting hole. If the soil isn't that great there, you can add in a little bit of compost and a little bit of bone meal for some nutrition. Put the turf or the soil back on top of them and give it a good water. They'll look a little bit wilted and a bit sorry for themselves this year, but next year they'll come back and look really pretty for you. Here's a quick reminder of what we've talked about today. Snip off your faded daffodil heads once they've finished flowering. Don't tie up your foliage into bunches. Leave your foliage to die back naturally for about 6 to 8 weeks before mowing or cutting it back. Water your foliage, and especially if it has been dry. And it is a good time to dig up and divide your daffodils if you are wanting to move them about in your garden or split up overcrowded bunches. Thanks for watching today. I hope you have found it useful and you know a little bit more now about how to look after the daffodils in your garden for a great display next year.